Chapter 37, The Age of Eisenhower. Introduction. In this lecture, you will learn about one of the most formative decades in American history.
The 1950s, the age of Eisenhower. Formative because what happened in that memorable decade laid the foundation for modern America. And the age of Eisenhower because Eisenhower's steady hand on the tiller of the ship of state guided the country safely through a sea of storms and conflict, when the country could have just as easily foundered on the rocks of conflict and division, or been swallowed up in the Armageddon of nuclear war, the threat of which you learned about in the previous lecture. First, you will learn why Eisenhower was the right man to lead the nation in such tempestuous times, and the 10 reasons why, Armageddon and the Cold War aside, the country was poised at home for a leap into prosperity unprecedented in world history, not just our history, when Eisenhower was elected president. You will learn about the creation of the modern consumer culture in the 1950s, a refinement of the one that was invented in the 1920s, which you studied a few lectures back, the one that you may have always assumed was the American standard of living. Now you will learn how the modern version of the consumer culture changed much more than the standard of living, how it changed American religion, sports, music, movies, shopping, advertising, travel, the organization of business, even the composition of the family. Then you will learn a bit about Eisenhower himself, the man whose influence loomed so large over this process. You will learn about his personal history, and how this most unpolitical of national leaders got to be president. You will learn about the immediate challenges he faced upon taking office, and about his game plan for working with Congress. You will learn what theories motivated his foreign and domestic policies, and where those theories came from. You will learn how and why the civil rights movement, so much in the news later in the 1960s, actually got started in the 1950s, what Eisenhower and the Congress intended to do about it, and what they actually did about it. You will learn what role the Supreme Court had in all of this, and what role Martin Luther King had in it. You will learn how Eisenhower came to terms with the big brother, big government heritage of his predecessors, Democrat Presidents Harry Truman and Franklin Roosevelt, a heritage which had been 20 years in the making. Ike had his own theories about what the proper relationship of the federal government should be to the people, and you will learn how well, and in what ways, he was able to manifest his own vision in governing practice. He had specific ideas on immigration, too, and enacted an immigration policy which would be radical today. You will learn how successful that was. Eisenhower had been the most successful military commander in modern American history before he became president. So what, do you suppose, was his foreign policy during the tense standoff years of the Cold War with the Soviet Union? The answer may surprise you. Eisenhower's decisions during these years became the basis for American foreign policy for the next 2 generations. In fact, Ike was confronted by policy challenges every day, both foreign and domestic. The nascent American civil rights movement, what to do about the toxic rantings of Joseph McCarthy, gangsterism in the labor unions, the creation of an American space program, re-energizing American education, balancing the budget, the MAD doctrine, proxy wars overseas, regime change in Iran and Guatemala, the stubbornness of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, what to do with the Hungarian freedom fighters, the rising tide of Arab nationalism in the Middle East, the bubbling cauldron of the emerging Vietnam War in Asia, summit meetings with Nikita Khrushchev, spying on Khrushchev's Kremlin and calling Khrushchev's bluff, the U-2 disaster, and taking on the communist Castro in Cuba, only 90 miles from U.S. shores. Eisenhower faced all of these challenges, and more, and you will hear about them in depth and detail in these 2 lectures. But wait, there's more. Other issues were added to this list to confront the president who followed Eisenhower, the young, dashing, and charismatic John F. Kennedy. You will learn how the persuasive Kennedy, a Democrat, was able to edge out his Republican competitor, Eisenhower's Vice President Richard Nixon, a candidate of infinitely more experience, in the election of 1960. Kennedy, as it happened, won more than just the election. He also won the hearts and minds of millions of voters, particularly those of young Americans. You will learn why that victory, a kind of spiritual triumph in addition to the electoral one, was so important at the time. Finally,
we close out these 2 lectures with a journey into the life of the mind in 1950s America.
A visit with the formative intellectuals of the day. When times are conflicted and traditional certainties less certain, the tradition of American letters has, in our history, answered the call with an abundance of introspection, analysis, and speculation. That is literature in a democracy for you. We saw such a period in the conflicted years leading up to the Civil War. We saw it in the writings of the utopian scholars before that, in the 1840s. And before that, we saw it in the pre-revolutionary years when the country was talking itself into rebellion, while it was still a diverse collection of British colonies. And we see it now, in the Eisenhower years, when the country was hammering out a new identity based upon the heady responsibilities that came with being a global superpower. Much of the criticism of that role was inner-directed, too, as some writers questioned the ability of American culture to deliver life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to their personal satisfaction. But though we find some of the speculations of those sensitive souls merely odd, like those of confessional poet John Berryman, who jumped off a bridge so that he could enjoy a new experience, without having to write a tortured confessional poem about it, still, everybody gets to have their say in a democracy, even those who exercise their right to commit suicide. Maybe Berryman thought the country was jumping off a bridge of its own, and he just wanted to show how it was done. Unlike him, however, the country did survive to enjoy a robust renaissance of life in every way for the next generation, even though that generation was conflicted enough, as you will soon learn, because that is the story we pick up next.
In this lecture, you learn all about its parent decade, the memorable Age of Eisenhower.